are live at 2 o'clock, so we'll save our stories till the next session. We'll call the meeting to order, and it appears that we are full quorum. But the first thing we need to do is just introduce everybody around the table. We'll start with members of the committee. So, Tricia.
I'm Tricia Nelson. I love saying I'm a retired planner of 2 years. But I don't know, 35, 37 years in land use planning. My last 10 years of my career, I was director out in Canyon County, and we developed and adopted fire impact fees, county working with fire districts, and then it started the process working with Canyon Highway District on adoption of impact fees for the Middleton service area. So
you are representing the city of Boise.
Representing the city of Boise. If ACHD cares, I'm also on the board of CINA, so I kind of have I could fill a role of a neighborhood rep as well. So, but yeah, I'm a Boise's representative.
So when were you appointed? This is your.
This is my first meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did watch the last meeting.
Yes.
So.
Okay.
And the
very
commission
good.
workshop and all of that. So pretty well up to speed.
Mr. Steve.
Walter Steed, City of Meridian. I am chairman of the Meridian Transportation Commission.
Peter Oliver with TOK Commercial.
Mike Wardle, chair at the moment and representing Brighton Corporation.
Kent Brown, my first career, I was an engineer officer in the Army for 26 years. And then I was the manager of engineering here at ACHD for 17 years. And it was on my watch that we put together the impact fee program and the CIP that goes along with it that we're working them out. I represent Garden City. And in addition to doing this for Garden City, I'm on the P&Z Commission in Garden City.
Eric, we'll go virtual with you. Just give us a brief intro.
Yeah, sorry, had to get off mute there. So yeah, my name is Eric Bodden. Yes. I am the director of quality for a company by the name of Photronics, and I am on the CIC representing Ada County.
Okay, and Eric Barnsdale, are you?
Yes, my name is Eric Barnsdale. I'm pretty much a greenhorn on this, but I'm a quick study, and I'm representing CUNA.
Okay. Okay, let's.
And then there's John as well.
John up there.
Yeah, this is John Turnipseed, representing City of Star.
Yes. Sorry, John, you were at the bottom of the screen and I was looking at the top. Very good. Then we are full quorum. So let's introduce staff today. Now, anybody? Okay. Sonia, do you want to introduce the team?
Yeah, so for the consultant team, I'm Sonia Delighten with Kittleson and Associates. We are the prime consultant on this effort, supporting ACHD in a review of their current CIP and traffic impact fee policy and procedures, and then we'll be updating that for their 2025 CIP.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark Heisinger, also with the Kittleson team, working with Sonia on this project.
And then we have our sub-consultant.
Jeff Wardle. I'm Mike's son, and
full disclosure.
Been coming to ACHD meetings with him for 45 plus years. So.
Well, it was only 1979 that we started that.
Okay, 44 plus years. City council meetings closer to 50, but and I'm an attorney at Clark Wardle here in Boise, and have been on the Citizens Advisory Committee on the impact fees off and on repeatedly for the last 20 years.
Okay. Any guests that we want to introduce, and then we'll go to the agenda. Are you supposed to staff?
Yes, ACC staff, Elizabeth T. Staff, ACC Senior Transportation Planner, and co-manager with Megan for the capital traffic impact fee and capital improvement plan update.
You have to be able to say it if you're gonna.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Jim Hansen, Commissioner.
Thank you.
District 1.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda then is approval of the minutes of our last meeting, August 21st. I read them and have no issues. Any other? I would entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes as printed.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Abstain.
That's fine. Thank you. So we're really at the purpose of the meeting then, and I trust that if you don't have a copy, there are copies of the items that were sent out. Tricia, do you have a copy of this?
I read it. I'll see if it's on the screen.
Okay, well, if you have something you could write on if you had comments or questions, but okay, Sonia, we're good to go.
All right. Okay, so just confirming that those folks who are joining via Zoom can see the presentation? Yep. Great.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Ensign is going to start off just with a brief introduction before we dive into the presentation.
Absolutely. And thank you for having us today. The reason I wanted to introduce myself first because I missed the August meetings. I want to make sure that I was able to, you guys see my face, have it recognized that I'm part of the team, and certainly I want to be as involved as I possibly could. But first things first, I just want to thank the CIC for during the August meeting. Certainly, there's was communicated to me that it was a lot of engagement from the CICAC, a lot of great communication that helped us guide us to as we went to the commission to identify what were the main topics that we were going to explore as part of this initial preliminary analysis section of this update, because we want to make sure that as much as we want to continue this update, we are also listening to the CICAC and the commission feedback as an initial portion of this process, and this is the next step of this process now, coming back as a follow-up meeting to present our findings, our preliminary analysis finding, with respect to those 4 topics that we identified in the commission, highlighted that we should move forward as part of this process. But in general, for this meeting, I wanted to set some expectation, because certainly on Friday, we sent an initial list of our preliminary findings, what we call the fact sheets, where we highlight many of the aspects that we found through the analysis of the peer-to-peer agency, as well as analysis of the legal code and part of discussions that we have had in between the August meeting to now. So during this meeting, we want to make sure that we're listening to the CICAC members. So if there's anything you guys have any questions or anything that you would like us to further clarify, we can certainly take notes. And we're planning, so for this meeting, we're planning to focus on the findings for this meeting. And then we're planning to come back with any additional questions, any additional things that the CIC would like us to come back with for each of the topics, and also at that point we will look to get a recommendation from the CICAC for the next meeting. We'll come back with, based on the findings and the analysis, we'll come back with a preliminary recommendation, but we will be looking for an official CIC recommendation at that point that will later be communicated to the commission in a future meeting.
But just a question, the commission actually was involved in helping to focus down to these 4 items as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this committee, the commission, and at this point, will this go back to the commission before then we come to the next step?
Yes, absolutely. So we want to make sure that we're also sharing with the commission our findings, our initial findings. We have a meeting scheduled for by the end of this year, in December, where we're going to present those findings with them. And then at that point, we'll set up another meeting to talk about recommendations and how we will move forward.
So input that we provide from this point will go to the commission as well as part, so that they can have that for their deliberation. Okay. Thank you.
So with that, I will give the floor to Sonia and Mark to to talk more about the findings, but thank you again for having us today, and looking forward to for today's discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Edinson. All right, so Edinson actually gave a great overview of this, but just so everyone is familiar, and there's a few new faces around the table today. So what is the overall timeline and process for this 2025 CIP and traffic impact fee development? So you'll remember we started back in August with a visioning session, hearing from you, and then we also went to the commission to hear from them. What were the areas of the CIP and traffic impact fee process that they were interested in investigating further? So we did that, and then the past 2 months in September and October, we've been diving into a national best practice research of those areas, really trying to decide and trying to determine what are other organizations doing out there nationally related to those practice areas. What does that tell us? And then we're coming back to you now to present those findings, to share those findings. As you saw from the handouts, there is a lot of material. And so we want to walk through that with you before getting to any final recommendations, so we can hear from both this organization, this committee, and the commission before we move forward with actually getting direction and implementing priorities. Once we do that, in the new year, in 2024, we will be taking that direction both from this committee and the commission to actually then move forward into the CIP update process. It may look the same, it may look a little different depending on what we find from this research. And then the goal is to later in 2024 have an updated CIP and traffic impact fee that can go forward to adoption. And so we are right here in the fall of 2023 coming to you with our findings to get your input on next steps. So I also wanted to take some time just to remind the committee why we're actually doing this project, why ACHD is actually doing this project. So in order to be able to collect impact fees, ACHD does need to have a capital improvement plan in place. And per the Development Impact Fee Act, the state code, that plan needs to be adopted or updated every 5 years at a minimum. ACHD actually themselves currently has put in policy that they will update it every 4 years, just to make sure that they're keeping tabs and updating needs and fees as is reasonable to account for the changes in growth patterns that occur. And so each update, what does that include? So it will include a 20-year growth projection. So what does the growth projection in Ada County look like over that 20-year future horizon? What needs will result from that growth projection? What transportation projects does that translate into? And then which components of those projects will actually be impact fee eligible? And then that all gets wrapped up into a new CIP document and a new traffic impact fee schedule. So this update, as we've talked about before, looks a little different. We're not just jumping into that growth projection and needs identification right off the bat. And so why are we doing that? Why are we doing this national best practice review? And there's really 4 reasons why ACHD wanted to take a more comprehensive look at this. So the first is that they wanted to assess how ACHD's current practices and policies align with what is happening nationally. The transportation profession, the tools we have available, the data we have available, that's constantly changing. And so ACHD really wanted to make sure that we're not just doing the same thing we've always done, that if there's a better or different way to do it out there that would hold value for our community, that we take a look at that. They also wanted to make sure that we are interpreting the Idaho Impact Fee Act in the most modern and up-to-date way that we should. Previous interpretations have told us one thing, but we always want to make sure that we're reassessing that and looking at how that applies to today's conditions. They ACHD has heard comments and input from its partner local agencies within Ada County about things that may be working well, things that are maybe not working as well. And so ACHD wanted to investigate these best practices so that we can respond to those comments and feedback. And then we also wanted to update the CIP and the traffic impact fee to make sure that it is aligned with the current impacts and needs of future growth. Make sure it's accounting for the way growth is happening today in Ada County and what the needs of that growth are. So as a refresher, in our last CICAC meeting, we came up with 4 areas to really delve into this best practice research. We took those 4 to the commission. You all actually made our jobs very easy because you very clearly stated the areas that you wanted us to research more. And the commission agreed with what those recommendations were. And so just as a reminder, they were this concept of service areas. Right now, ACHD focuses on one county-wide service area, but you wanted us to investigate, is that still the best approach, or should we go with it to a multiple service area model? The next were collector roadways. Currently, the CIP and the traffic impact fee are focused on arterial classified roadways, and there was interest in assessing whether or not collector level roadways should be brought into the plan. Expanding the range of projects considered. Right now, the CIP is primarily focused on arterial roadways and vehicle related projects. Not exclusively, but primarily. And so there was interest in assessing, are other agencies expanding their capital improvement plans beyond just vehicle needs to incorporate other types of projects that the district implements. And then finally, analysis period. As we look at that 20-year growth model and the future needs identification, past procedures have done that focusing on a PM peak hour. And so we were interested in evaluating nationally, is that still the best practice, or are other agencies looking at different types of analysis models? So those were the 4 that came out through our discussion with you last time and that we brought to the commission, and then they also agreed were the right areas of focus. So maybe I'll pause there just quickly before we dive in any deeper to see any questions, anything I'm not representing correctly from our previous discussions, or anything this group would like to add.
I've gone through and I've made some notations, but I want to wait until we get to the specific ones so that, any comments before we go, Phil?
Just a quick high-level question. At the beginning, you mentioned you interacted and gotten input from other agencies, partners. What's the kind of cross-section of those? Is that just the cities?
Yeah, great question. I think what I was referring to is that, over the course of the past few years since the last CIP, ACHD staff themselves and also elected officials, ACHD's elected officials, do hear from the cities and Ada County within Ada County about what's working well for them related to the impact fees that ACHD is collecting, what projects are reflected within their boundaries in ACHD's CIP. And there's, some different perspectives of these things are working well for us. These things we're not sure how our priorities are being incorporated. And so ACHD wanted to look into that further so they could respond to those questions and comments.
So is there anything specific to that, though, that factors into this now?
I think it's a lot of what we heard from this group at the last meeting. Are we in Garden City, who don't really have a lot of arterials in our local boundary, are we still getting the benefits of impact fees or not? I remember John from STAR made the comment, are we in STAR, are we paying impact fees and getting back equal benefit in the projects that are being constructed? So I think it's a lot of comments along those lines, and I'll look to staff. Feel free to add in anything that I haven't captured. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Yeah. All right, so how did we go about this process? So once we had identified the 4 areas for investigation, we started by reviewing in detail and making sure that we understood what is ACHD's current methodology related to service area or related to range of project, whatever that might be. And then we proceeded to identify peer agencies from around the country that either do the same thing that ACHD does or have a different approach to that, that focus area. And we had agencies for both, those that did a similar practice to ACHD and those that do something very different or slightly different. Once we summarized from that range of peer agencies what is a range of possibility within that focus area, we turned to Jeff and we asked him, okay, so this is what other agencies out there are doing. Which of these would fall within something that would be compliant with the current Idaho Development Impact Fee Act? Which would not, which may be outside of what the Idaho Impact Fee Act allows. Obviously, that's a marker that we have to stay true to. We can't recommend something that would not be in alignment with what the current Impact Fee Act allows. And then now we're here at this stage where we're reporting back to you. We, as Edmondson said, we'll also go to the commission, but reporting back what we found from this review. We haven't gotten to the point yet where we're sharing a specific recommendation of this is how we want to move forward, because there's a lot of information that's wrapped up into those sheets. We want to share with you what we found, maybe what some of the pros of different approaches might be, and then really hear from you what thoughts that brings to your head and what direction you think we should go. And we'll also do the same thing with the commission. And then we'll come back once we've heard from both this group and that group and share maybe a recommendation with you at that point to get your feedback on that. So after we do these report back and feedback sessions, we will be developing those initial recommendations, which we again will bring back to you for your input and guidance. And so, yep. Oh, okay. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mark to kind of take us through the discussion of what this best practice review has found.
Thanks, Sonia.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess just to kick things off, we wanted to highlight some of the different agencies that we looked at in this initial kind of best practices review. And we did look at additional agencies on top of what we show here. But these are agencies that we found helpful either because there were components of their impact fee program or CAP that related to potential kind of those focus areas that we talked about earlier in ACHD's program, or just agencies of kind of similar geography, similar size, and development characteristics to really just get an idea, a gauge on what other agencies kind of a similar size are doing. So examples of that would be like Spokane, Salt Lake City, those types of agencies. And we're going to be highlighting what some of these agencies do as we go through our findings for each focus area.
You can see we actually also have 3 other agencies within Idaho. Those may be smaller agencies, maybe not quite on par with what it's like here in Ada County, but we found those interesting because they do things slightly differently, but yet they're still required to meet the same overall Impact Fee Act that we are. So we thought those were interesting examples as well.
Yep, great point. And that's going to be a nice caveat to put on all the findings that we have in here for each of these peer agencies is each agency that's in a different state is subject to different legal codes. So while they can make for good examples just to see what other agencies are doing, it's not always an apples to apples comparison in terms of what might be feasible in Idaho. So to start things out, we'd like to talk about the service area focus area. And before I jump into this, just kind of want to maybe lay some ground rules for just discussion here. We have a couple slides for each focus area, and we'd like to run through those and then stop and have a discussion. So just as I go through, if you have any questions, I ask that you just wait till I get through those slides, and then we're happy to kind of flash back if you'd like to talk on a specific point that was brought up. So to to kick things off for service area, first we wanted to just highlight, why are we talking about this? What have we heard? And really, we heard quite a bit just from the various representatives of agencies, the folks here on the advisory committee, as well as the commission on service area. And really the common thread that we identified through all of it, that agencies have about the service area setup is, are the impact fees being paid and the projects being built and the benefits received by local agencies commensurate? So a lot of these different areas have potentially higher growth than other areas, and projects are being built all over the region. So is there kind of that equality aspect? So that was kind of the driving factor that we were looking at just when we were kind of looking at this question and looking at service areas. I did want to note that ACHD has gone through a couple iterations of service area setups in the last 30 years, and we do highlight that on our sheet on the bottom of the focus area sheet for service area. So if you'd like any background just on the history, we do include that in the fact sheets.
Or talk to Jeff.
Or talk to Jeff, providing us with all of that information. So first we wanted to start out just by highlighting what other agencies do. And we looked at a lot more agencies here, but just wanted to highlight a couple to bring up to this group. And really, we're not going to go through each of these in detail, but really what we found is there's a lot of variation in terms of what other agencies do in regards to number of service areas and some other factors. So you'll notice that some locations of similar size to Boise, Spokane might be a good example, have multiple service areas, while others, like Salt Lake City, only have one. In terms of other agencies in Idaho, Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, Rexburg, they all have one service area. That's not all on the table here, but that was something consistent that we saw. I do want to note that some of these are driven by requirements in legal code. So for example, Texas and Nevada have very specific laws in terms of how many service areas you need based on population. So we wanted to highlight that up here just for the sake of comparison, but do want to note that, again, it's not going to be that apples to apples comparison in terms of kind of what's feasible here in Idaho. An additional kind of item that we saw, a common theme, was the use of overlay zones. There's a lot of different terminology. Some agencies call them discount zones, so some agencies call them benefit districts. And essentially what those are is they keep the same service area, but then they have specific zones identified within that service area where maybe travel patterns are different. And they'll say, okay, based on the mode split being different or trip lengths being different, they'll potentially reduce or increase fees in that zone. So that's just a common theme that we saw and that we wanted to bring up. And I know in Jeff's information history that he provided, it looks like ACHD had a benefit zone set up even in the early 90s. So it's not an entirely new concept here, and it's something that's used in a lot of agencies all over the country. And so anyway, just wanted to highlight that in terms of what other agencies do. So kind of just refreshing some of those findings. Really, service area findings were largely determined by, it was a combination of state legal code, jurisdictional boundaries, and other local factors. Some of these agencies we were able to talk to, and a lot of these service areas simply matched other boundaries that they had for utility billings, political boundaries, that kind of stuff. And they just said, okay, if these boundaries already exist, we're going to use them for the service area. While some sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And then there were other local factors just on top of that determined how they created these zones. So for example, agencies that had a geographic area with maybe multiple central business districts, for example, where they're like, okay, these are all areas that have their own distinct commute patterns. It might make sense to have our own service areas because they have kind of these distinct regional travel patterns. Then they said, okay, it would make sense to have multiple service areas. And then on top of that, just wanted to highlight that some agencies do have that overlay zone or zones to change rates while keeping that single service area. So that was that example I just talked about. Some key areas that use that were Bellingham, Washington, and Tampa, Florida. We were able to talk with representatives from both those agencies. And we can, if anyone has any questions, we can get into the specifics of kind of why they chose to have those zones. And then in addition, just really those what those overlay areas and zones entail are factors such as mode split or tripling to adjust kind of that base impact fee within a single service area. So those were some of the additional initial findings that we found through this best practices review. And next wanted to highlight from the results of that review, as well as discussions with ACHD staff and discussions with legal counsel, what are some of the benefits of having that single service area versus what are some of the benefits of having multiple service areas. So for the benefits of single service area, it really, the main benefit comes down to is that it accounts for the impacts of these travel patterns that are regional. And that has to do with, on one end, it's development. So a lot of development in the valley has a regional draw. If it's a home subdivision, those folks are oftentimes going to have regional trips all over Ada County. And then you even have extreme examples like hospitals where maybe it is really a regional destination. And having a single service area just helps to account for those kind of regional travel factors. And then on the other side, many of these projects benefit many in the region, and we have some slides that kind of highlight actual regional travel patterns. But even if a project is in a different jurisdiction for when it's built, it may benefit those in a different jurisdiction. In addition, it's consistent with just development patterns in Ada County for stakeholders in the valley, just having a consistent fee schedule and service area. And then in addition, it provides flexibility for project funding and timing. And this is a point that we've heard from ACHD staff quite a bit. So essentially, if impact fees are collected in a service area, they need to be spent on projects in that service area. And there are timing kind of components and requirements associated with that. I think they need to be spent within 7 years of being collected or something like that. So if you get smaller, you're going to have more constraints in terms of how those impact fees are collected and then when they're spent. So those are some of the benefits of a single service area. In terms of benefits of multiple service areas, you know, one main thing, and we heard this from different agencies, including Spokane, it really is just more granular tracking of fees received for spent in each area. And for some locations, there's some big advantages just in terms of communicating the benefits and how people are receiving those benefits in different areas. Second, and I brought this up earlier, it can address impacts of unique travel patterns and draw areas. So for example, in Tampa, Florida, they have a distinct downtown area, and then they also have a distinct, almost kind of university area with its own business district, and those are like 10 miles apart. And so those had their own kind of distinct regional and travel patterns and commuter patterns. So for them, it made sense to say, okay, we'll have two different service areas because there's kind of these regional travel patterns that are connected to these projects that benefit folks with those travel patterns. And then the final benefit of multiple service area that we wanted to highlight is that it can potentially be a tool to incentivize development type. So having multiple service areas results in different fee schedules in different areas, and that can incentivize development type.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we wanted to also get a little bit into the legal code and really talk about how our service area is determined. And we can get into the history of how Ada County has gone through kind of different systems, but we wanted to just kind of roll it back and say, looking at the code, how our service area is determined. So there's a couple different points on this screen. This is kind of the main definition in the code. But really, I think what we wanted to focus on is it's determined on the basis of sound planning or engineering principles or both. And I know we brought this to Jeff and we said, hey, you know, what are the requirements in the code and what information is kind of used to determine the service areas? And I know, Jeff, you came back to us and said, okay, so in this final sentence here, what can you give us in terms of planning and engineering? So we wanted to bring some information that kind of connects the planning to the region to the service area.
And this language in this definition of service area, when the Idaho legislature adopted the Idaho Developmental Impact Fee Act in 1992, obviously it wasn't created out of whole cloth. I mean, this is a definition, and this statute is very similar to that in South Carolina, Illinois, and I think one other state. But this concept of we're going to defer to the agency to come up with a defensible service area
plan, you know, the parameters are, it needs to be tied to what your planning exercises are, your engineering requirements, or both. And so it's one of those where if an agency can justify and has the data to do it, I think the legislature is deferring to how it gets done.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, and I think at least one of my takeaways was there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of different ways to cut it. So from our end, when we looked at, you know, how could ACHD justify their current system, it's really that the majority of trips in Ada County are regional. And we pulled some origin destination data to kind of look at these travel patterns in Ada County under existing conditions. And on the left, it shows the percent of trips that originate in each city, what percent are internal and stay within that city, and what percent are external. So they go outside of that city to somewhere else in Ada County or Canyon County or just really anywhere else. Internal trips are shown in blue and external are shown in orange. And you'll see with the exception of Boise, the majority of trips in every city are external. With kind of on the high side, you have Garden City with 79% of trips being external, with Kuna, Eagle, Star, Meridian, all between 51 to 61% of trips being external, and then Boise.
Star.
What's that?
Did you say Star?
I think so.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I was gonna say Boise being the exception, where actually only 30% of trips are external, and about 70% of trips remain within the city of Boise. And then on the right, we highlight just generally where our trips in Ada County going. And you have about almost 50% of trips going to Boise, with the other 50% of trips going to other locations. And I think Boise has about 40% of the population in Ada County, so you do kind of see that discrepancy of Boise being kind of that central location for that commuter pattern.
So when we think about why would a single service area make sense? What is the engineering and planning framework in order to make that call? I think this tells a big piece of that story is people in Star are not only driving within Star, or people within Eagle and Star are not only driving within Eagle and Star. People in Meridian are not only driving within Meridian. When you look at Ada County as a whole, those trips are going, you know, pick your agents, pick your local city. The trips from that city are going all over Ada County. And so they need transportation projects all over Ada County to go to those origins and destinations. I guess the exception might be Boise, but there's still 30% of Boise trips that are going elsewhere throughout, outside of the city limits.
Thanks, Sonia. So I think that was the last slide we had. And from here, I think we wanted to just open this up, get everyone's reaction, kind of what are your initial takeaways from this information, and then if you have any additional questions, we'd love to hear them.
I want to go back though, Jeff, take us through the history from when we went from the multiple to the single and the rationale for that. If you're able. I'm able.
Remember, we only have 2 hours.
No, we only have 2 hours, and it's really hard to cover 20 or 33 years, I guess, going back to 92. But 1992, the impact fee statute is adopted, and for 10 years, that's what we functioned under. And in 2002, a significant rewrite was undertaken, in large part because of some calculation difficulties and problems. And I was instrumental in that rewrite in 2002. And, you know, for those that don't remember, I mean, it was driven by Micron was mad, and Micron was mad on some individual assessments is kind of what the genesis was, yeah. And they engaged me.
That's what drove it.
And that's where we ended up. So ACHD in that 2001-2002 period was in the midst of doing an update. It engaged Transpo
to work on that. And there were a lot of revisions and amendments that happened in that 2002, but the main one was the requirement that you have to be tied to your capital improvement plan. That's the methodology that you have to check and verify everything against that. And so Transpo recommended that ACHD leave this notion that it had under the prior 10 years of, and I forget the term, I mean, it was benefit areas and assessment districts.
Both.
And so it had these two things where basically we calculate the fee in certain areas this way, and then we commit to utilizing the fees in these areas. And the problem with that was there was kind of a thumb on the scale, because some of our highest growth areas had significantly lower impact. So we jump forward. Transpo goes, recommendation in 2002 was to do service areas where the service area is the assessment area, the benefit zone, all of it is that. In the midst of that, I got appointed to be the chair of the subcommittee on service areas, and we engaged with the jurisdictions, and I said, if you're going to put the Citizens Advisory Committee with this, we at least want input from the cities and Ada County. And so everybody kind of participated in this. And there was an exercise where we asked Transpo Group, okay, what's the right number of service areas? And they're like, well, we can do whatever. And so there was a model that was done that I call the smaller, more plan, where I don't remember the number, but it was more than 12. There were more than 12 service areas designed. And the outcome of that, because it was tied to the CIP, is you had a negative impact fee in Southeast Boise for the area adjacent to Federal Way, because you'd just done the big Federal Way project and there really weren't very many other projects in there. So you had a negative impact fee in Southeast Boise, and then you had high growth areas in North Meridian, South Meridian, CUNA, that the disparity in the fee was just not palatable. So from the more smaller, the 4 district model then came forward in 2003, and it was an exercise in dividing the county in ways that were intuitive, but that also mathematically worked. And I just remember everybody was more or less happy with how it came out, except Ray Stark of the chamber did not like the fact that the city of Boise was carved out, and it looked like, you had a knife cutting into the middle.
Downtown Boise?
Yeah, the downtown Boise piece. And the reason the downtown Boise piece was carved out was to better align the impact fees charged in the 4 districts. Because if you had left downtown Boise in that Southeast Boise service area, you would have had 3 service areas that were almost, as I recall, almost 3 times the impact fee of what that would have been. So there was nothing magical about 4 service areas other than you could draw them initially in 2003 in a way that was intuitive, that was balanced, and that, yes, people in that Southwest service area could acknowledge that we have higher growth, we're going to require more projects. Our fee is going to be a little bit higher, but it's not going to be so off the charts. It was never intended that those 4 service areas be the be-all, end-all. And in fact, I had the conversations with staff as we went forward, because it was designed essentially to balance those and ensure that dollars were getting used in those areas. With the 2003 CIP putting in the 3 cities crossing, when that then got updated in 2008, 2009, and it went from just kind of a design estimate with the CIP to this is what it would actually cost to design and build it, that took that service area, which was kind of the northwest part of Boise, and it increased it significantly. And the conversation I'd had with staff was that's the kind of project that is so large and that is so regional in nature that at a minimum, we ought to be redesigning and realigning the boundaries so that you have multiple districts feeding into it, 3 or 4. And that was kind of the genesis of how I came along to the perspective that, you know, 4 service areas seem to work fairly well, but we are getting to the era of really big projects that really necessitate the overall view of us as a county.
Is that what brought us back to 1?
Well, so then we jumped forward from 2008, 2009 into 2012, 13, and staff had been looking at some alternative models. And I was on the committee, and I remember we had the meeting with the city, and Hal was there and Caleb was there. And I just said, I have come to the conclusion, gentlemen, that 1 service area satisfies everybody's concerns. You know, because your concern is, are the dollars being used where we are? And you looked at how trip data had evolved in and around the Great Recession and kind of where we were. And I just said, I think it's legally defensible. There are some other things that you could do if you wanted to do it around the periphery to talk about some of the concerns that Boise and Eagle and Meridian had. But that's how we went from the benefit areas to 4 that everybody's like that. 4 doesn't really work to 1.
Just to add in, absolutely, he did a great job of summarizing it.
I remembered it all.
The only reason, though, that we made the 4 was able to work, especially toward the end, was because we did have some really big projects that went between the zones. And there, we got around. If they had been confined to any one zone, I think we would have had more problems. Because but that enabled.
Yeah, there was that discussion. I don't remember what we called them linking something.
Exactly, and so we were able to say we spent money because we did a lot of justifying to certain people where the money was being spent to try and show there was a correlation over a longer term between where it was collected and where it was spent. But we only could do it because we did have a series of really big projects that cut between the zones.
So in order to, go ahead, and then I'll.
I just want to kind of call out one thing you mentioned, because when I looked at the pros, there's some cons, but to me, if this is more a question we might ask the commission, are they willing to consider vastly different impact fees by service areas? Because if they aren't, then I don't know what the point is of spending time on it. It's kind of the dog wagging the tail, but it's one of those
that resulted in
non-technical issues.
That kind of an issue, though, resulted in a lot of complaints.
Right.
When they were different, because that very thing, it was a problem. In fact, you would know more about this. The developers in certain areas, they really didn't like the idea that there were certain areas that you're going to wind up with paying quite a bit more.
Yeah, that was, to be honest, one of the driving factors was that you had certain groups that just didn't, their view was, well, it's the Schrodinger impact fee. They want the impact fee as low as possible, utilized right in front of their house, but they want that project over there done. And
that's correct.
It was an effort in realpolitik to get the BCA on board largely by going, no, impact fees are not here to discourage development in certain areas. Impact fees are here to ensure that development pays its fair share.
So one follow-up point is just where my brain is at. Maybe we only need 2 service areas, because obviously on this map of trips, Boise stands out as just different. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I'm not assuming we'll get a 4 or 5 for each city, but maybe 2 is better than what we have today. Just looking at the trip.
That takes me to what I hoped it would be just a quick summary feel from the committee. Is there, based on this history and the challenges associated with parity and competition, frankly, is there any reason to carry the discussion for revisiting the service areas or zones back from 1 to more?
Some thoughts.
Okay.
For 40 years, I lived in north central Idaho, Lewiston, Moscow, where Spokane was the capital of North Idaho. You cannot go area to area in Spokane unless you use the interstate to go east-west. Going north to south was impractical in 1978, and it is today. It's a little better because they finally drove a north-south arterial straight up through the middle of part of it. Whether or not that problem was a result of having 6 areas, I don't know enough about it to say, but it certainly led me to thinking about that when I saw Spokane with 6 different areas. Nothing was tied together. You could go into downtown and things were great, but try to go north or even south for that matter, and it was a chore. Secondly, personally, I like the single service area. Collected versus spent, I think it's more collected versus benefit. There's probably a territorial thing here. If you're collecting from my area, I want it spent here.
Absolutely, that's what they.
But you end up not helping the area because you've got a great street in, pick on somebody, Garden City. What does that do for me in Meridian trying to go downtown in Boise? It may not. I kind of like the idea of benefit zones to give some little bit of, it's okay, you're getting something out of this. We're not just taking all of STAR's money and spending it elsewhere. But STAR benefits from having better streets in Meridian so they can get to where they want to go on the other side of Meridian.
One interesting thing that happens every year, I assume it happens yearly, but each of the cities, I don't know what the county does, but each of the cities establishes its own priority list and feeds that information back that eventually goes into the TIS. So I'm not sure if that's a kind of the benefit zone that I might be talking about, but Sonia, you were shaking your head.
So I think what you're referring to, it goes into the integrated 5-year work plan.
Yes.
Correct me, is that right? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Which is slightly different than the CIP. It's
Yes,
more
the question about, the benefit zones.
Yeah.
It sounds like each of the cities does get its opportunity to establish its benefit priorities.
I think that's
It does.
a good point.
And I think that also brings up another good point where, ACHD has a much larger overall revenue that it expends than just the impact fees, right? There's more to funding in Meridian or Garden City than only impact fees. And so that also needs to be, I think, factored in to tell the whole story. I will clarify though, what we saw from other agencies, how they use the word benefit area or benefit zone is a little different, whereas they specifically change impact fees or discount impact fees. An example might be in downtown, where they would give a downtown area adjustment to its impact fees to account for the fact that there's more walking and biking trips in downtown versus driving. So that's how in impact fee language, these other peer agencies were using the term benefit area.
Laura, I apologize, I was calling you John. I just wanted to know if John or Eric on screen have any comments on this subject. Okay,
one quick comment. I don't think any of us are opposed to, spending the money across the entire service area. It's just proportionally, it seems like so many of the folks out here and over on the edge of the world here don't feel like we're getting a good balance between the amount of money that's collected and how it's spent. We realize that it's got to go to Eagle, and and Garden City before you even get to Boise. So, you know, some of the money collected here has to go there. It's just proportionally, how it's divided up seems to be the disadvantage that the folks here are feeling and are not sure how to actually resolve that.
I would like to comment on that, because that is I represent Garden City. John, as I recall, you represent, who do you represent?
Star.
Star.
Yes.
So Star, you're sort of like Garden City. And so you can make that argument, except the people that are going through Garden City, with two little short exceptions, they're not getting the way they're going through Garden City are on state highways. So the money that's being collected by these impact fees in Ada County, all right, they're not being spent in Garden City because there aren't any arterials in Garden City. That'll come up on the issue when we talk about collectors. But right now, that sort of answers your question about people out there wondering how that impacts, that there's not impacting them. Well, it's not being spent in Garden City on arterials.
Tricia, comment, and then I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. So,
I mean, one of the thing about impact fees is you have to think of the changes over time. And the one thing that I'm most acutely aware of that is really important, and we'll know it later, we don't know it now, is how deep is the hole of existing deficiencies that can't be used, where impact fees can't be used to resolve them. And I think when we talk about maybe looking at a 24-hour model versus peak hour, I think filtering those kind of really priority roads, I'll say arterials or collectors, I think we'll find that the range of projects is going to be narrow, where the impact fees can really make a difference to get a project done. I mean, everybody, I think to me, the goal is collect as much as you can, get as many projects as you can. But I think just because of growth and the increase in existing deficiencies, I'm really curious of how much realistically we can get done. And then I'll just reiterate, Boise's perspective. I looked at the priority list that when it went to council in February, and there's not a lot of road expansions or capacity expansions in most of Boise. I think there's some areas south that could be debated, but that's the question. And I think this initial data kind of shows that. I mean, that's going to be front and center in my mind. So I just wanted to kind of share where I'm at and some of the things I'll be looking for as we go forward. And then, I have one question for Kittleson, because I'm weird. I really liked the regional flow diagram, but Compass hasn't really updated. It's really refining the flow between sub areas of Ada County. I mean, I loved it so much, they gave me a t-shirt with it on it, but it hasn't been updated for 10 years. Is that like totally outside the realm of possibility, or I don't need an answer right away, but.
Well, I'll just share,
you know what I'm talking about?
Clear, that percentage diagram that we presented, so that's actually data that was pulled from Replica, which is, this a program or a data service you can buy as the spring of 2023, that the data that we presented. Right. And we aggregated it obviously for this meeting at a pretty high level, but if people are interested in isolating Star, where do your trips come to and go from, Meridian, Garden City, we could present that. Obviously it gets very detailed, and if you wanted to pull that from Replica, you can get that specific.
At least for Boise, I'd like to understand where the 30% is going.
I know for a fact we have it all in a spreadsheet.
Okay.
So it's there, it's available.
Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me.
in order to move on to the other three items, I'd like to just propose a summary statement relative to this issue, and that is that the committee does not see a compelling reason to expand the service areas from the single to multiple at this point. Okay, Boise's not.
No, I agree with that. I understand exactly what you're saying with regard to Boise. But having gone through this, and when we tried to do that, it created lots of problems, which were solved by making it one area. And one of the arguments in favor of only having one service area and was brought to the fore. This is a county-wide highway district. And one of the major reasons, going clear back to 1972, that it was put together was to make sure that the road between each section were being built to make traffic so you didn't wind up in the kind of a situation like in Spokane. And in my view, that is facilitated by having only one area and not trying to justify or even attempt to justify why in certain areas you're spending more. Because
So I'd like to pull the committee, and John and Eric, will start with you. Single or multiple? John?
I can support a single if we recommend that they look at this zonal, the benefit zone concept, or there's any advantage in that.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah,
I'd like to say single as well.
Okay, Kent?
I'm in favor of staying with single.
Single.
And,
More than one.
okay. So that draws the consensus of the committee at this point for feedback to the commission. And
Yep,
so
that's really helpful.
let's move on.
I guess before we move on, if I could just ask a quick question, I guess what would be like the primary reason?
Well, I think it's too premature until I see what the projects are. I mean, if there are no projects in a large section of Boise, and I don't think the service area has to follow city limits or anything, it'd be based on sound planning or engineering, then I would want to revisit that at that time. But we don't have that information yet, so
Okay.
that's why I just think it's premature to.
Collector roadways.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry.
just a quick, in addition to that, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, sorry.
Or you can come here.
Mr. Chair, very quickly, just wanted to highlight that certainly we understand, and thank you for providing that initial summary based on the findings. Certainly we will bring back more information, more statistics behind our findings. Certainly we're collecting that at this moment. So next time we meet, we'll certainly bring more information regarding that aspect.
Very good, thank you.
There you go.
All right, collector roadways. So this is going to be in a similar format to the service area, just in terms of kind of how we go through this focus area. So similar to service area, we wanted to start with what have we heard? Why are we looking at this topic? And you know, one thing we heard is our communities with limited arterial roads receiving benefits from impact fees. So since impact fees can only be spent on projects on arterial roads, if a community doesn't have these collectors, are they still benefiting from these fees?
This is the Garden City question.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you very much. Oh no, I was impressed. You obviously they were listening when I gave my little speech.
Okay. Yeah, I was shocked to learn that Adams Street is a collector. Ken, I always thought it was an arterial.
No, it's
25-mile-an-hour arterial.
that's correct. That's right.
All right. And the second question is the existing approach for funding collectors and arterial roadways really just the most effective way to fund and complete the collector roadway? So more from an administrative standpoint, is this the most effective approach? And then finally, how are updates to older collectors addressed by the existing approach, and how do you kind of address those shortfalls? So wanted to start out just by highlighting what other agencies do. And similar to service areas, we really found a mix of agencies that funded collectors via impact fees versus agencies that didn't fund collectors through impact fees. Some of the agencies that did are on the top. So Spokane, Tampa, Florida, as well as Salt Lake City, they all do include collectors as impact fee eligible. And then wanted to highlight a couple other agencies, Bellingham, Phoenix, and Idaho Falls, that do not fund collectors through impact fees. Typically, when you read through these documents, they don't really provide reasons for why they do or do not include collectors. However, we were able to talk with some of these agencies to kind of pick their brain a little bit about kind of the reasoning. And really, the common thread is that the agencies that do include collectors, it's because they carry regional traffic. They have collector roadways that serve maybe as an arterial would function, just in terms of kind of when you define an arterial, it's to carry regional traffic. And they have collectors that do more than just take traffic from a local subdivision and tie it to a nearby arterial roadway. These are roadways that go for 5-10 miles and really serve as that regional kind of lifeline for traffic. We did want to note a couple other ones. Idaho Falls, they recently updated their impact fee program last year, I believe. And they actually did include collectors at first, but then lowered them just because their impact fee levels were too high. So they were too high, and then they kind of circled back.
By too high, you mean it was just
Politi-
sheer too much money being asked for?
The political opinion was that they were too high to foster the amount of development they were hoping for. Yeah. I mean, it's not.
Would that
there's
slow
not
down
a-
Ada County just a little bit, maybe? Just rhetorical, never mind.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I might point out when we started, we were the same way. I can't remember whether the issue was so much on the impact fee levels, but when we started the program, collectors were included as part of the system that you could spend money on.
Yeah, great, thanks for that background.
Right, yeah. I cannot remember what drove us to remove them or when it was. Trish?
That's a question, and if no one knows the answer, that's fine, but I'm curious. I mean, we use arterial collector in typical kind of federal aid definitions. Is there the opportunity to be more specific with to the typologies in the master street?
And I think as we go through these slides, we do get into some of those questions. So let's keep moving through the slides, and then we can have discussion.
All right. And so one other item to note is that some of these agencies did fund collectors both through impact fees as well as development exaction, which is contrary to how ACHD currently does it, where it's development exaction as well as some other kind of funding sources, but not exaction and impact fees. So Spokane was an example that did both. However, they did share that it was confusing and challenging for administration. So they've had success doing that, but did share that it's not an easy process in terms of that accounting exercise and not trying to overlap. So in terms of kind of breaking down what are the benefits of funding collectors through exaction and what are the benefits of funding collectors through impact fees. So we kind of wanted to write a breakdown of what you could potentially gain from going one direction or the other. So in terms of funding them through exaction, and I do want to share that a lot of this is what we have received from ACHD staff, just in terms of what a success has been. So I want to provide some context for where these points are coming from. So our number one benefit is that collectors really are built directly by development. So they're still funded by growth. And I know when we talk about impact fees, one of the big drivers for them is that growth is paying for itself. It's paying its due. And we really do see that in terms of how collectors are built today in the current process. The second point is that development can construct complete roads currently. So right now, impact fees can only pay for certain parts of projects. So for example, in ACHD, they can't be used to fund bike lanes and sidewalks. We'll be getting a little bit into that later. But when funded through exaction, development can really construct the complete roadway, so including the sidewalks and bicycle facilities. And then finally, the current system builds collectors fast and efficiently, really just when it's needed to serve the adjacent land use with development. And the flip side would be when you fund it through impact fees, it has a lot of those constraints just related to timing and when impact fees can be collected versus when they can be spent.
An example of that could be, you know, a development that is not adjacent to an arterial, but adjacent to a collector. If it builds that collector, it's able to get access immediately when that development wants to move forward versus having to wait for ACHD to collect the impact fees that is needed to build that whole road and not, you know, wait on access until that happens.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. So when you look at the benefits of funding collectors with impact fees, a couple points we wanted to highlight. And really the number one is you can address the impacts of regional travel on collectors that do carry regional traffic. So I think there are collector roadways in ACHC's jurisdiction that probably do carry regional traffic, and those might benefit from impact fees.
May I just interject, that kind of goes to Tricia's comment about typology.
Yes.
Yep.
In reality, if a collector starts to carry regional traffic, it ought to be reclassified from a pure collector to at least a minor arterial, so that it does become eligible.
And I say, what's also probably true is that there's travel on the arterials that could be more appropriate to the collectors if the collector system was built out. So I think you need to look at it both ways. Does that make, I guess Eagle Road's an example. It had the full parallel collectors, then maybe that would save capacity on Eagle Road because the people because they have no other choice than to travel on Eagle Road because the parallel collector is incomplete. So I look at it at both ways.
Sorry,
Yep.
go on.
Nope, good
Yep.
points.
So the final point that we wanted to highlight is that if collectors were impact fee eligible, it would give ACHD the ability to fund new collectors in areas where near-term development is not anticipated. So that would be a tool in the toolbox if they were funded through impact fees. And I think currently, just when you look at development, you know, kind of patterns now, it's a lot more development, kind of developing almost this greenfield land and able to build the grid with it, and the grid might not be necessary until that development is there. But you know, I think those are kind of the pros and cons that you can think about when you know, the impact fees versus exaction approaches. And so, yeah, that was the last slide that we had on that topic. So I think similar to last time.
If I can just add, you know, Kate, you raised the question of why did we take collectors out? And here is my recollection. You know, we were having the discussions, we were going through the process, and I remember we posed the question to staff, how many collectors are programmed in the CIP already? And Gary Inselman came back, and there were very few segments. And so then the discussion had turned to, you know, under the Idaho Development Impact Fee Act, if you're going to charge an impact fee for an improvement, and it's impact fee eligible, and we're including it in the formula, then you've got to account for some type of credit or reimbursement if you're then going to exact it. And the concern was at the time, because, you know, I also remember Dave Weinkoop was really concerned that North Meridian was just going to collapse the whole world. And we all managed to move to North Meridian, and it turned out okay. But you look at those North Meridian collectors that were required in those large North Meridian subdivisions, and even kind of the home builder faction came to the conclusion that it was just cleaner to take collectors out because the types of collectors that you see are functionally local streets. I mean, they're local streets with 3 additional feet. I mean, it's just, that's what they were. And so rather than deal with an impact fee that includes collectors, it was decided that they were such a minor part that avoiding the accounting issue was the justification for taking them out. Now, I think we've had 25 years of the conversation of, well, is that a collector or really should it be reclassified? And that, I think, is potentially the solution to some of this.
Okay, other comments or thoughts? Walter?
You've got 3 bullets under the benefits of using development extraction. What are the detriments?
So I think it's kind of a flip of what we have on the right.
That's what I wondered. I was wondering if that was the answer.
Yeah, so and that goes for most of these, how we approached it, since a lot of the pros and cons on one side might be kind of the opposite of pros and cons on the other. We phrase it more as benefits of one versus benefits of the other to try not to duplicate too much of that. But so yeah, so some of the detriments would be under the current approach. Impact fees can't be used to address impacts of regional travel on collectors.
And if I may, a second question. What would a combination look like?
I think, and some agencies do this, as
Yeah.
Mark highlighted. I think a combination would be that certain collector roadways would be specifically designated in the plan as special collectors, if you will. And these are collectors for one reason or another, whether it's because of the type of traffic that they carry or else are impact fee eligible. And they would be mapped that way, they'd be designated in the plan that way, and they would be incorporated into the impact fee calculations.
And that's not too complicated to actually do.
It's not too complicated to do. I think what the complicated component of it would be, you know, to develop an understanding of what is that threshold? What is that criteria that would make a collector special enough, or that would make a collector a special collector to be impact fee eligible? Is it because it's regional travel? Is it because we don't feel that there is going to be, it's an important connection, but we don't feel there's going to be growth in that area to build it itself? You know, what would be that threshold that would classify that collector in that way? That would be the complicated discussion, I think.
It kind of like what we're hearing over in Meridian Transportation Commission, complaints or questions about cut-through traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe that cut-through should be allowed to, but the road needs to allow for it.
Mm-hmm.
I gave Adrian a little speech on this, and when I look at it, when I get it seems to me that in areas that are growing, where you're having a development, then it seems to me the only timely way you can do it is the way we're now doing it, where you exact it at the time that the developer did. The only place that I could see where you would be able to build it, in other words, when a developer puts his development in, he has to build a collector. If it's got a collector in this, it's got to be built when he builds it. You can't be waiting for them to get their money together and put it on the CIP, not on the CIP program, but on the 5-year work program, and that would be impossible to do. And when I originally put it in, I pointed out how few arterials we have in Garden City, but also in Garden City, 99.9% of all of our development now is infill. So if you made it eligible for collectors, let's take south of the river. The only collector south of the river is Adams Street, and Allworth is the other end of it. It's already been built out. Okay, it's built out pretty much, so you're not going to get one there, and you're not going to get it anywhere, any big developer that would result that you would be looking forward. So, and now that I look about and I think about what it is, and your point, countywide, if we have collectors that are performing a function that should be arterial, the way to fix it is to reclassify them. And then they would be eligible for impact fees if you did that. So anyway, the more I think about it, I kind of think to be timely and everything, the best way we probably could do it and avoid a lot of argument would just leave it like it is.
And I tend to agree with that. Being on the development side of it, we do build a lot of collector roadways, and a lot of our collector roadways are essentially those that are purely to take the traffic out of the center of a section to the arterial
Exactly.
system.
Which is a true collector.
Yes, but if it's one of those collectors that needs to go through and literally divide and separate all of the neighborhoods within that section, then I think that's where you have to get to, is it a minor arterial? I have a real problem with that concept. If HAC wants a collector and they don't want to make it, if it destroys the neighborhood, then it needs to be reclassified from a collector to something minor arterial or whatever that is. So anyway, that's my complaint, but from my perspective, I don't necessarily see a need to change from the system that we have currently.
Mike, from your development perspective, would you have a problem if impact fees help upgrade that collector you're paying for?
Not at all, if in fact it serves, a broader.
A special collector or a minor arterial function?
However, I, as a developer, would be in chatting with staff to say, these are the reasons that should not happen.
Even though you're not gonna pay any more money?
Well, no, we do a lot of, cooperative development agreements. We're rebuilding miles of arterials right now in conjunction with HAC, so we know how that system works, but we try to protect our neighborhoods too from, collectors that destroy or completely separate neighborhoods. So that's, I think the question is, does it need to carry traffic more than just from within that section? Does it need to
Tied to the neighborhood across the arterial?
Does it need to be a bypass for Eagle Road or for Chinden or for Highway 69 or something else that makes it more than just a residential collector roadway? That's where the discussion needs to go if, in fact, we were to change this.
Well, then, but that would do it.
That would do it.
If it's a bypass arterial, it's really an arterial.
Well,
And
that's
should
true,
be
but right
done.
now, all of the little blue lines in the sections of
Absolutely.
HHD's master street map are.
But that's the way to
collectors.
fix that.
I agree.
Is not changing what the rules are on collectors.
So what do we need to tell you right now to carry on, to the commission? Because I think that clearly there are two different issues here, and I think they're both valid. Don't change it unless it needs to be more than just a section collector system that carries the residential traffic
I'd
out.
say strategically, I would support if it's a gap, where there is a gap, you have like sidewalks. You get what you can out of development, but there's always a gap. So it doesn't work until you fill the gap. And I kind of look at collectors, if there's a gap and, Farmer Brown's not gonna sell his land for God knows when, then strategically you could prove that it would benefit everyone.
You had a problem with Chinden going from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to pick a number?
So,
Your road.
and if it helps take local trips off the arterials, then I think it would be a good use of impact.
Well, I agree. If it's
But I don't
intended
think
to.
a one size fits all.
If it's intended to take traffic off the bigger system and it's going to go through those neighborhoods, then it ought to be impact fee eligible. If it's purely a collector system that drains to the arterials, then I think the developers are doing a good job with that. So, is that enough information?
Yes, I think it's good. It's good information. What I'm hearing is that the build out of these new collector roadways is happening effectively through development, and development is happy with the approach that's been going on. There may be other outside of that, which I think gives us direction for the CIP and TIF. Outside of that, it sounds like there may be other concerns related to what function do collectors in general play, and what traffic are they intended to serve, and is that the traffic that they are currently serving? I think that's another question, but that's something that we can pass on as part of this plan to see what HHD staff and leadership, what approach they feel is the best way to address that concern.
Good, I think that's adequate.
Okay.
Let's move on to expand.
All right. Just so you know, the service area topic, it's okay. We spent a lot of time on that because that is the meaty one that we're all trying to grapple with. So I think we can get through the rest in a timely manner here.
Yeah. All right, moving on. So the next project we want to talk about is range of projects that's included in ACHD's CIP, and what projects are impact fee eligible. So currently, for those of you who aren't aware, the projects in ACHD's CIP are primarily roadway widening and intersection improvement projects that where the focus is to improve vehicle capacity on ACHD's arterial roadway system.
In the peak hours.
Yeah. we'll get to that. So we had some, and currently when you look at what's actually impact fee eligible, not the entire cost of those projects are impact fee eligible. So for example, if an arterial roadway is being widened, the cost associated with the sidewalks, with the bike facilities, and some other components are not considered to be impact fee eligible, because the idea in the legal interpretation was, it needs to be tied to so that's kind of the current approach. And the questions we've been hearing is, could other projects, so in addition to vehicle lanes, be funded by impact fees? And I think when that question was posed, it was partially, could standalone projects be funded in addition to, when we're widening these roadways, can we just make it all impact fee eligible? Can we make the sidewalks and bike lanes, for example, impact fee eligible? And then kind of going down the line, the question was, can we increase the flexibility of how we use impact fees is I think one of the drivers. And then in addition, are there any legal constraints to including additional project types? So kind of revisiting that prior legal interpretation and saying, hey, can we make any changes based on current interpretations? So in terms of what other agencies do, we highlight a couple on this slide. And really what we found is that most agencies that we review include bicycle and pedestrian facilities as impact fee eligible as part of their roadway projects. So if they're going to go widen an arterial roadway with impact fees, they'll include the entire cost of that project, including sidewalks and bike lanes, as impact fee eligible. And we also wanted to note that we have an example in Idaho. So Idaho Falls, they take that approach in the impact fee system that they adopted last year. If they widen a roadway with impact fees, those impact fees cover the entire cost of that project. So we did want to highlight the Idaho example. In addition, there were a couple examples where agencies used impact fees to fund standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects. So an example of that would be an arterial roadway that has a gap in the sidewalk, and the arterial roadway doesn't need to be widened, but impact fees are used to fund those specific sidewalk facilities or something similar. We did want to note that none of those examples were in Idaho, so those might not necessarily translate to the Idaho legal code. And then we also just wanted to make note that a lot of the agencies that did kind of fund standalone projects related to bicycle and pedestrians, they actually used it on a basis of person trips instead of vehicle trips. So ACHD's current approach and how they determine impact fees are based on vehicle trips and vehicle trip generation by land use type. And many of these agencies that funded multimodal projects use person trips. We don't necessarily think, and just through our discussions with Jeff, think that's necessary to do in Idaho to justify kind of changes to this approach, but we did want to highlight that as a finding from our peer review, just as a technique that some agencies use to provide more flexibility in how they spend these impact fees. So in terms of findings, again, similar format to before, want to highlight benefits of the current practice as well as benefits of expanding project types. So benefit of the current practice is that it does maintain the known proven legal interpretation. So ACHD has been successful for the past X many years and in the current system, so with limited kind of legal liability.
Quick question,
Yeah.
Jeffrey, does state code allow the flexibility, or are we constrained?
I think state code allows you the flexibility. I mean, obviously, the legislature has come back and trimmed
in recent years, some of the ability to condemn for certain improvements, but they haven't taken those away. And just to provide, the background discussion here, again, in 2002, 2003, it was an extensive discussion, and where everybody kind of came down was, yeah, you can put these improvements in, but A, what are you going to do to address the deficiencies that exist where you don't have them? And B, the more you stick in as being impact fee eligible, the larger your fees were going to be. So,
or the fewer projects.
Yeah. So I don't think it precludes anybody from doing it. And again, the conversations that we had in 2015, 2016 with the municipalities were, okay, if Boise wanted these types of projects and Eagle wanted these types of projects and they weren't necessarily the same, there is a means by which you could maybe build those in, but we just need to do the homework.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And so the second benefit of the current practice is that it does lower the overall impact fee cap. So when you take off some of those impact fee eligible costs, it lowers that overall cap to the impact fee. If you look at the benefit of expanding project types, and I think really when we're talking about expanding project types here, we're talking about some of the multimodal aspects of these roadway projects. And we do want to highlight how this might apply to other transportation related facilities, and we'll cover that on the next slide, more focused on the multimodal aspects. But the benefits of expanding project types is that it would provide ACHD with funding to build the complete roadway up to the current cross-section standards. So the current approach funds the majority of these arterial roadway widening or intersection improvement costs, but there is that small gap that needs to be made up from other funding sources. So really expanding that impact fee eligibility component would just provide ACHD with that full funding for the projects. Second point is that it can provide more flexibility to fund projects that benefits all modes of travel. So recognizing that not everyone drives and some people travel with other modes. So really tying impact fee benefits to those other modes of travel. And then finally, it can provide more flexibility to complete projects. Sources for other facilities are insufficient. So that's kind of getting to the same point I made earlier. If you have that budget shortfall because not an entire project is impact fee eligible, it would help to fill that gap. So next, I wanted to highlight just some other quick notes from our findings, focused less on kind of the multimodal aspect. So through our research, we found that funding of other project types, so transportation safety, transportation related buildings, so operation centers, for example, maintenance facilities, through traffic impact fees was not found in our peer review. We did find a couple examples of kind of non-capacity related projects. I think Idaho Falls has like a signal timing optimization project in there, but that was really the exception of what we found in our review.
And you could probably argue that is somewhat related to capacity as well.
Yeah, good point. And then we do want to note, however, that Idaho Code does allow for funding of public safety facilities through impact fees, and they actually list specific types of facilities that would qualify. But we did want to note that maintenance and operations facilities are not included. And based on that, our input with Jeff, and I'll let you jump in if I'm misrepresenting anything here.
Yeah, Steve Price and I had the conversation, and I think we're both of the opinion that the way that the statute's currently written, you'd have to have a statutory change for ACHD or any municipalities to incorporate operations and maintenance facilities into a capital improvement plan. That you could clearly do it for fire stations and police stations and ambulances, but it's just not clear for any other type of facility.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So really all that said, in terms of expanding the range of projects, really with that focus on impact fee eligibility, we found that it likely is feasible to include the entire roadway cross-section up to ACHD design standards as impact fee eligible. However, expanding it to other project types beyond that, such as safety, maintenance, operations, likely not feasible under Idaho legal code.
And we also did not see examples of that in the peer review.
Correct. So yeah, that was it for information for that topic.
Comments, Trish?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. First thing I thought of, you looked at Idaho Falls, but when you looked at other, the two other communities, did you look at what they funded? Was it Twin and Rexburg?
Twin also does not deduct anything from their roadway costs. So they, in their impact fee calculations, they include the construction costs for the entire roadway, including any bike or sidewalk facilities.
The other thing I think we gotta look at that, and I just reminded of, it was 2009 when ACHD adopted their complete street policy, and that's everything. And their recitals talk about their powers under Title 40 to do that. So I don't know, with the statute talking about sound planning and engineering, I mean, I think that would be, you know. And I think with the legislature putting restrictions on the use of some of that state funding to not include pet and bike, I think impact fees will help with that gap. So I just wanted to share that.
I'm not sure how the funding actually is coming down, but I mentioned some cooperative development agreements. We are rebuilding about 1.5 miles or 3/4 of Lake Hazel Road with ACHD, and obviously we're doing a full improvement in that. So some of the funding currently then must be coming from, you know, for these external elements that are not included, must be coming from other sources. But I mean, the impact fee system is essentially reimbursing for those costs, but it must be impact fee plus.
Yes, yeah, that would be the case for that. And I feel bad speaking for ACHD staff here, so please jump in, but that would be the case. Absolutely. Those, if you want to call it outside of the travel lane, components of those roads would come from other funding sources that ACHD has.
Yeah, since we're doing it. You might recall last time, this is a major issue for Garden City because I already mentioned we have this problem that almost all the arterials that are now involved, arterials that we potentially, they belong to the state. And that's Olive Chinden, Olive Glenwood. So one little part from the bridge to Chinden on Veterans, well then and up to Boise on Veterans on Curtis. Those are the only ones, the only sections that are eligible right now. But the top priority projects, all of them that we turn in on the improvement plan that we want, are pathways and crossings and sidewalks. Sidewalks is a major problem. This wouldn't affect it. In the old part, I call it the old part of Garden City, that's south of the river and east of Glenwood. Okay, not east, let's just say east of Veterans, though it includes a portion of that. All of that was all built with no drainage and no sidewalks. So it's a major problem. So I don't, this won't impact on the fact that some of our major projects are to get pedestrians crossing Chinden, and this won't impact on it. That being said.
Do you mind if I interject for a second there? So, while a project like that may not be directly in the CIP and impact fee eligible, I think there's potentially still an impact, because if ACHD now has more impact fees to fund those projects where they're getting some from impact fees, but then have to make up funding from other sources, that may free up more funding for
very good
different
point.
projects.
And so that just what I'm about to say.
Sorry.
Well,
yeah,
no, that is really helpful to help but I am very much in favor of, I think we should include sidewalks, pathways, and bicycle facilities that are within this structure, just like out where you're not building just the vehicle part of Lake Hazel, right? You're gonna build the whole thing. And I think that when you build that on an arterial, that those ought to be eligible. They're part of the facility. And
Quick
so
question.
that's where I am on it.
I appreciate that. A quick question, maybe staff as well, but if, in the integrated 5-year plan, I'm assuming that not every project listed there is impact fee funded.
That's correct.
So the priorities that you've talked about, that you've put into the mix, may not be coming out of impact fees, but they're part of the integrated 5-year work plan potentially, and can be funded from whatever source.
That's correct.
Impact fees or.
That's what she was saying. That's why
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
And so, you know, I'm not advocating for one position or the other. We're here to listen. But if you were to have more impact fees available to fund some of these complete streets, if you will, not just beyond the vehicle lanes, that may free up additional funds for other projects that go into that program.
Trish, did you want to comment?
Just one thing, and I trained myself working at Canyon County, but every time I hear, well, it would reduce the impact fee, I hear it will shift the cost to the taxpayer. And I think if it's part of the adopted cross-section, it's part of what we consider and define as a street, and we're gonna build it anyway, I would not support cutting any piece of that out, because then, at least I know the residents of Boise, they think growth should pay for itself. And I haven't met a developer against that, as long as it's fair and done, you're right. So I don't see that as a benefit of a reduced impact fee. I see that as a shift to the taxpayers. That's, in this day and age, really not acceptable. So every time I hear that, it's going to provoke that for me. So, yeah.
Expand the range, multimodal forever.
Okay. Gentlemen on virtual, what are your thoughts and comments?
I think we should expand the project types. I like the idea of paying for an entire road and not just the street.
Eric?
So I'm not against that, but I'd like to understand also, if you start doing that now, how do you mind the gap between what has already been completed and could cause gaps in those future projects? So, for example, if you go multimodal on roads at a certain point in time, and that's only on new projects, then how do you bridge those multimodal pathways? And where does that money come from? Does that make sense, or am I misunderstanding?
No, you're right on, because I had made a note earlier in the day, build complete roadways, and then the question that I put down here was, how do you deal with the existing deficiencies? Because again, we're potentially pulling the pot of money to correct some of those major transportation needs with the things that are important, but clearly.
No, and I think that's the fundamental issue that would have to be addressed through the CIP and working with staff, is that if you decide to increase the scope of what's eligible at this point in history, we still have to have a plan for curing system deficiency. Now, to a certain extent, the plan has been ACHD funding those out of tax dollars already, since they're not eligible. And it may, as we get down the road, I think with what Kittleson has been tasked with here, we may have a CIP that looks slightly different than what we had in the past, because there are classes of projects that maybe need to be in the plan that we haven't included in the past because they haven't fit that box, so it goes to classification, it goes to those other things. And under the Developmental Impact Fee Act, I mean, a jurisdiction, as long as it does its homework, does its math, has its plan, probably can defend whatever it wants to put in there. But it's just the pushback that you get from the various sectors from. So Because again, just the last little bit of color on this, when we had kind of this very same conversation in 2012 and 13, you know, Eagle wanted bridle paths. And you're like, Bill, a bridle path is not a system improvement that actually relates to expense. He goes, yeah, but our citizens would like to have it. And I go, great. Then enter into a joint development agreement with ACHD, and you guys pay for that as, you know, because what they wanted to do was preserve right away and utilize it for that. But I'm like, but you want to keep the facility. So you can do it, but you got to plan for it, you got to justify it, and you can't impose it on other people just to get the benefit of it. So
We need an equestrian collector system.
Okay.
we had a great one until 1892.
Then I sense the takeaway on this would be that there needs to be consideration of complete streets, but we also have to balance then the question of what does it do to the resources in terms of getting more of the system completed in a timely manner.
Yeah.
So,
In addition to, impact fees should be addressing complete streets, but there still needs to be a mechanism in place to address the existing deficiencies, which impact fees don't go towards. Good, great
the last
feedback.
item.
All right. Still 15 minutes left for the
We're
fourth one.
we're almost
nice
there.
work, everyone.
Thank you for hanging in with us.
All right, so final focus area we want to talk about is the traffic analysis period. And I guess just a little context for kind of what it is today at ACHD and how it's applied in the context of the CIP and impact fee program. So essentially every project in ACHD CIP is identified through either existing or projected future PM peak hour volumes. And so basically there's a number and it's a volume and it's compared to a threshold, and if it's above that threshold, it's a deficiency, and if it's below that threshold, it's not a deficiency. And deficiencies typically turn into either roadway widening projects or intersection improvement projects. So really what that comes down to is every project that's in the CIP is identified through that PM peak hour volume. And there's other factors that go into it, but that's really the number one driver of that process. So really what we've heard is our roadways being over-designed by a focus on this peak hour demand. So it's the highest volume of the day. Are we over-designing roads just based on this 1 hour? And then second, what are some of the safety implications of designing our system to peak hour needs? So there's a lot of just research and just talk nationally about some of the safety implications of high driver speeds on roadways that are really wider than they might need to be, and that results in an increase in severe injuries and fatalities. So what are the implications of kind of using this current approach, and does that affect some of those concerns? And then finally, is planning for the peak hour still the best practice? It's typically been the best practice when you look back just at most methodologies and what other agencies do. But the profession is just evolving just in terms of data available from travel demand models, probe data, which is where we pulled those regional travel patterns earlier, as well as other sources. So given some of those concerns about safety implications, as well as over-designing, and just additional data, are there additional best practices out there? So in terms of what other agencies do, you'll notice there aren't as many agencies highlighted on this slide, and that's really because most agencies that we reviewed still use the peak hour for their long-range project identification. However, there were a couple agencies that we did want to highlight. And I think before we get too deep, I just want to highlight that all three of these agencies, none of this is actually adopted policy for them yet. It's either being explored on current projects or really just in that initial development and discussion phase. So the first one I'd like to point out is Portland Metro. So the MPO there is using this. It's kind of a reliability metric is what they call it. And essentially what they do is they look at all of the, really they're focused on grade separated roadways, so the freeway system. And they're saying, what's the total number of hours of roadway congestion on these roads? And so really the key there is it's an emphasis on freight and the movement of goods, where typically they're not traveling, so freight's not trying to travel during the peak hour anyways. So are they still facing that congestion outside of that peak hour when they are trying to travel. And really what Portland found it was useful for is prioritizing these capacity improvements just on a system where most roadways are already congested in the peak hour. So when they make a map of places where congestion is in the peak hour, it's all red. But when they use this other metric instead, then they can really start to dive into where are these bottlenecks based on congestion over the course of the day.
Yeah, which of our roadways are congested more than 4 hours a day?
Yeah.
Which are congested more than 6 hours a day? And I will also add, and you may have said this and I just didn't catch it, but they are really focusing a lot of this on their freeway system, as opposed, so it would be at that level, freight movement on their freeway system. How much of our freeway system is congested for more than 6 hours of the day?
Yeah, and in terms of how they're applying this, is they're using it to help prioritize projects in their regional transportation plan, which is set to be adopted this December. So not officially policy yet, but might be adopted soon. The other two examples we pulled are City of Tucson and City of Indianapolis. And we're going to go into less detail on both of these because they haven't applied it to a project yet, but they have considered using it. And really, where they're kind of exploring it is areas and roadways that have limited growth. So they have historic data to say, yep, traffic volumes haven't really changed here. The roadway might be wider than it needs to be. So we're gonna look at that full cross-section daily profiles of volumes throughout the course of the day, just to make sure that the road is adequately designed for most of the use over a 24-hour period. So applications for that are more really like focused corridor studies. So if there's a certain segment of roadway and they're potentially looking at reallocating it, so that's where they're exploring beyond just that peak hour of data and looking, okay, how does traffic look over each hour over the course of a day? I think Tucson is looking at a 16-hour period. The City of Indianapolis is really looking at that full 24-hour period.
I will maybe just add, because a study that Kittleson has completed has been mentioned in various circles, has been mentioned in front of the commission. It's a great study, and it's really important research. But I think the context under which that study was taken and the purpose it was intended to be used for is also important. It was really for those situations that Mark highlighted for Tucson and Indianapolis. It's looking at a specific corridor in a constrained environment. How do we want to allocate our precious right of way within this constrained corridor, which is an important context and an important decision to make. I would suggest it's a different decision than when we're looking at regional capital improvement plan and transportation impact fees. So just wanted to provide that context.
Yeah, that's great. I think Portland is probably the one example where they were using it for really these long-term, region-wide identifying capacity improvements. So in terms of how this breaks down and some of the benefits of using the current peak hour practice versus revised, the main benefit of the current peak hour practice is it's really just, it's still the national practice used by most agencies for traffic analysis. And so what that means is when you look at just the methodology that's out there for helping us calculate capacity on roadways, most of it is based on the peak hour. And then on the other hand, peak hour data is readily available. It's what agencies have historically been focused on collecting. It's what most of them collect today. So really the tools and the data are kind of there for the peak hour. So it's aligned with the current data available for analysis for this current update as well. And then in addition, it does maintain ACHD's, just their current vehicle level of service and kind of the methodology they've been using to identify capacity projects.
And yeah, I'll just add to that last bullet. There are a lot of conversations going on that we should take a broader look, and I think those are important conversations, but I also know that ACHD is very sensitive to its constituents and its users, and most of them, or a large portion of them, need to get from point A to B to work on time, or to be home on time for for childcare and all those things. So that's another factor we have to weigh. If you're traveling during the peak hour, there needs to be a measure of reliability for that as well.
Yeah, great. So some of the key benefits we saw for using potentially a revised time period, and I've said all this before, but just kind of reiterating, really it can be used to reallocate parts of a roadway cross-section, especially in a constrained environment with limited right-of-way, really with a focus for safety of all users. So examples of where this might be applicable are areas where traffic volumes are not growing. So you might not need that extra vehicle capacity. So it could be especially useful for things like corridor studies. And I think examples where we've seen this might be useful are, maybe it's a location where traffic volumes aren't growing. Maybe there's a lot of schools nearby. Maybe there's a lot of bike ped activity that might not be captured really during that peak hour snapshot. That would be an example where it might be really useful to look at that kind of extended daily profile hour by hour. And then addition, it can also be used kind of expanding beyond that peak hour. That additional data can be used to help prioritize projects really in areas where most roadways are already exceeding thresholds in the peak hour. So a couple ways that could be applied. It could be a measure of just the percent of time per day that a roadway is congested. And it could be used particularly helpful for freight. And it can identify bottlenecks for freight that travel during some of these off-peak hours. And I don't think we note this here, but again, it's kind of the flip of the other. There are a lot more data needs associated with kind of this revised peak hour.
So my takeaway is that I don't think we're over-designing our roads, knowing how much more time I actually put on now for the same A to B trips. The additional traffic that we've got, I would hate to see us do anything that would decrease capacity from our existing model, but that's just my opinion.
Drop back one slide if you would. The first sub bullet under the first one does not apply to the areas where traffic volumes are not
yes,
growing.
That one.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I don't want to, I'm doing my best not to say build it and they will come, but I'm afraid they're coming anyway.
I would agree with you, the majority of Ada County, that is the case. There are some examples where volumes aren't growing. Downtown is an example where the traffic volume growth is minimal in downtown. But I would agree with you, when we're looking at the entirety of Ada County, which is the purview of this project, I think your point is very important.
Trish?
One thing that I've heard that's kind of concerning is mayors wanting to reduce speed limits on arterials and not understanding the amount of congestion that would result. I mean, they have good reasons. They feel it's a safety benefit.
Don't say Meridian.
Meridian, maybe. Actually have that one on videotape. But that's where, if that gets traction, that's where I think a revised time period would be needed just to sort out the different levels of congestion throughout the county. Otherwise, I think the peak hour just isn't going to, regardless of the traffic, it's just not going to tell the whole story of what's going on out there. So I just wanted to share that concern. I'm haunted by the traffic model years ago that encompassed it for me of just dropping the speeds on Highway 44 in 2026. And it was apocalyptic. So.
Perfect.
Anyway.
I know that you're strict on timelines, but Jeff, thanks for that impact fee history. I've always wondered about that. And then the other thing that kind of tied into all these, which I was going to bring up, but we're running out of time, is, for instance, the new zoning code of Boise. I mean, it's going to impact all of these topics. I think you're going to have more. I would love your input, but more density.
Theoretically, if we have based our compass models on the underlying comprehensive plan, the zoning code doesn't adversely affect those underlying theories. But
that's why that's looked at annually by, I say by Compass, but by all the demographic committee, and things are adjusted to make sure it's a reconciliation process that's done annually, just to make sure things aren't going, apart from the adopted forecast and by
that's,
traffic zone, by
to be
very
honest, I
specific
think
areas.
that's what most Boiseans missed in that whole process is the densities that they're talking about are, they're not beyond what we had based our comprehensive plan on from time immemorial. The struggle's always going to jurisdictions where the comp plan, contemplates an R20, an R40, and the neighbors are like, this should all be R2.
But back to, the pie charts, in the case of Boise, if in fact the internal trips, now it's not saying that internal streets won't have an issue, but it doesn't look like that it would be impacting the regional system, to have more density in Boise itself, because, it's not going to increase the number of people that are traveling back to work, out from the outside areas.
See. It's and to the point of I office downtown, and I live right outside of downtown, and it's been just steadily, you can just see it almost monthly, if not quarterly, with post-COVID, as people are coming back to the office, whether voluntarily or forcefully. I mean, it is going like this. It's pretty incredible. I just think it's important to think about as we go through these, and as it relates to impact fees. You've got 600 more apartment units coming on. Will everybody walk and ride a bike? That would be nice, and I hope they do. But it's a lot more people, and there's more people living within those units. So anyway, just my observations and put it out there.
Well, we need to draw a conclusion for, whether we really need to consider an alternative for a different, approach, peak hour versus whatever, so, consensus?
I think we should stick with it. I'm a licensed civil engineer, but when I was here, I would, on all this kind of questions, I would say, go ask Terry. That would be Terry Little. And I think Terry would say, stick with what the national consensus is.
Now you have to say, go ask Josh.
Here's a question. Probably about 15 years ago, when ACHD had transpo, they were looking at a 2-hour peak. Is that an alternative to a peak hour or a 24-hour? Is that
it's
something that other people do?
So that's something that Portland Metro does. They've had that for a while. And Mark, if I'm speaking out of line here, correct me. So the difference right now is that our Compass's model is a peak hour model, and it does not currently adjust. It assumes that all the trips who want to make a trip will still happen in that peak hour. So we don't currently have a tool that would allow us to approach it in that way. ACHD does, though, as part of, in their development review, you are able to look at shoulder hour analysis. So that is not something that's foreign to ACHD, and they have recognized those constraints. But for this application in our region, we currently don't have a tool that would allow us to do that. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, the Compass model has a shoulder hour,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think that the complexity that goes into determining that number is the same as the peak hour.
Yeah.
So it's more of just a factor down.
Factor down peak hour, yeah.
You'd find little difference? Is that what you're saying? If you go to the 2-hour, you'd find little difference to the 1 hour?
I think so, yeah,
Yes.
if you use the Compass model.
So
Peak.
Walter, your comment, peak? Peter? John and Eric, what are your thoughts?
I don't think that we're over designing, and the peak hour is my inclination.
Okay.
Agreed.
I would have to say the same.
Okay. Do we, have we answered the questions? Do you have the direction?
Yeah, so I would say this has been really productive and good insights, good direction. We will incorporate this committee's feedback into an update we provide to the commission, which is looking to be sometime in December. Based on what the commission says, we will be circulating back with this committee in the new year to say, we've heard from everybody, we factored in these new ideas. Here's our recommendation for how we move forward with this 2025 CIP update, to make sure that it aligns with what this group was wanting. And if there's any further feedback, we can take it at that time as well.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Unless there are any objections, we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. I know that
Thank
was
you.
a lot to
It's a
go
great
through in
report.
2 hours. Yeah.
Good job.
Thanks, everyone on screen.
Productions.